"My husband hasn't touched me since our wedding night," she confessed to her best friend in secret. But she didn't realize that someone was listening to every word. What began as a simple confession turned into a passionate and dangerous love. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end and you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment saying where you're listening to this beautiful story from. We continue. Under petals of fire. Eleanor always knew she had been born to be an ornament. For as long as she could remember, her mother, Matilda, repeated like a mantra that a true woman should be like a white rose in the garden, beautiful to behold, fragrant, but never touched by sullied hands. She grew up in a two-story house in Richmond, where silence was sacred and conversations revolved around prayers, church services, and what the neighbors might think. Her father, Dr. Henry Stanton, was a man of few words and many absences. A respected barrister, he spent his days at his chambers and his nights locked in his study, surrounded by case files and a bottle of whiskey he thought no one knew existed. To Eleanor, he was a distant figure who appeared on Sundays for the family lunch, asked a few perfunctory questions about her studies, and disappeared again behind his newspapers and obligations. Matilda molded her daughter as one might sculpt an angel from marble. Eleanor learned to walk with an upright posture, to speak softly, to never show anger or frustration. She learned that her body was a sacred temple to be preserved for the right man, chosen by God and approved by the family. She learned that to dream too big was a sin, that to question was disobedience, and that a virtuous woman found her fulfillment in marriage and motherhood. At 15, when her friends from the private girls' school started talking about first kisses and flirtations, Eleanor felt as if she were watching life happen through a fogged-up window. She was beautiful, everyone said so. Straight brown hair that cascaded down her back, honey-colored eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets, fair and soft skin that had never known the sun without protection. But all this beauty seemed to exist to be admired from a distance, like a painting in a museum. At King's College London, studying English literature, Eleanor met Clarissa Miller, a cheerful and easygoing girl who came from a less traditional family. Clarissa wore colorful clothes, laughed too loudly, and spoke of men as if they were fascinating creatures and not threats to feminine purity. They became friends, despite their differences, or perhaps precisely because of them. Clarissa represented everything Eleanor secretly wished to be: free, spontaneous, her own person. At 24, as Eleanor was finishing her master's degree in English literature, Matilda began to discreetly pressure her daughter to settle down, not with a career, but with a husband. The attempts were subtle, comments about so-and-so who had married well, invitations to social events where there were boys from good families, insinuations that a single woman at 25 would be looked upon unfavorably by society. It was at one of these events, a charity dinner at the Savoy, that Eleanor met Vincent Marlowe. He was everything her mother could have wished for in a son-in-law, successful, polite, from a traditional family, and, at 36, the perfect age to settle down. The heir to Marlowe Pharmaceuticals, one of the country's largest pharmaceutical companies, Vincent had the kind of presence that commanded respect in any room he entered. He was handsome in a classic way, with dark hair always perfectly combed, blue eyes that seemed to analyze everything around them, and a measured smile that appeared at just the right moments. He spoke softly, gestured little, and had a way of looking at Eleanor that made her feel like the most important person in the room. The courtship lasted 8 months and was a sequence of refined dinners, trips to the theatre and outings in public places, always accompanied by the discretion that both families demanded. Vincent was a gentleman in the most traditional sense of the word. He opened doors, pulled out chairs, sent flowers, but never attempted more than a chaste kiss at the end of their dates. Eleanor found this comforting, proof that he respected her, that he was different from the men Clarissa described in her stories of tumultuous relationships. The marriage proposal came on a December evening, on the terrace of his penthouse in Chelsea. Vincent knelt before the illuminated London skyline and offered a diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Eleanor said yes before she even had time to think, because it was what was expected of her, because her parents smiled as she had never seen them smile before, because it felt as if she were finally fulfilling her destiny. The wedding preparations were a whirlwind of choices that were not really choices at all. Matilda commanded everything, from the dress to the menu, always consulting her future mother-in-law, Mrs. Eugenia Marlowe, an elegant and severe lady who spoke little but opined a great deal through meaningful glances. Eleanor felt like a doll being dressed for a shop window. The wedding took place at St. James's Church, Piccadilly, in a ceremony that looked as if it had been lifted from the pages of a high society magazine. Eleanor walked down the aisle in a French lace gown that weighed more than she did, carrying a bouquet of white roses that trembled in her hands. Vincent waited for her in a tuxedo, smiling that measured smile, and when she reached him, he whispered, "You look perfect." The reception was at the Surrey Downs Country Club, with 300 guests Eleanor barely knew. She danced, smiled, greeted people, received congratulations and gifts, but had the strange sensation of watching someone else's wedding. When they finally said goodbye to the guests and went up to the presidential suite at Claridge's, Eleanor felt her heart race for the first time in months. Vincent embraced her tenderly, said she had been a perfect bride, that he was proud to have her as his wife. He helped her remove her veil, commented on how beautiful the day had been, and then, undressed in silence, put on a pair of silk pajamas, gave her a kiss on the forehead, and went to sleep on his side of the bed. Eleanor stood motionless in the middle of the room for long minutes, still wearing the white lingerie set she had chosen with such care, feeling simultaneously relieved and rejected. When she finally lay down, Vincent was already fast asleep, and she spent the night awake, listening to his calm breathing and wondering if she had done something wrong. The honeymoon in Paris was an extension of that first night. Vincent proved to be an attentive companion, knowledgeable about the city, always eager to take Eleanor to the best restaurants and tourist spots. They took pictures in front of the Eiffel Tower, went on a boat trip on the Seine, visited the Louvre. To an outside observer, they were the perfect couple. But at night, in their room at the Georges V, the same scene repeated itself. He treated her with fraternal affection, talked about the plans for the next day, and slept as if he were alone in the bed. Eleanor tried to broach the subject once, indirectly, commenting on the beauty of the room, on how happy they were there, on how special it was to finally be married. Vincent smiled, stroked her hair, and said, "You are too pure to worry about such things, my love. Our relationship is more elevated than that." She didn't understand exactly what that meant, but something inside her whispered that perhaps it was better this way. Perhaps Vincent was truly special, different from other men. Perhaps true love was indeed more spiritual than physical, as her mother had always implied. Back in the UK, they moved into a mansion in Hampstead that had belonged to Vincent's grandfather. It was a beautiful house full of history, with well-tended gardens and a breathtaking view of the city. Eleanor dedicated herself to decorating it, organizing dinner parties for Vincent's friends, to being the perfect wife she had always been trained to be. But at night, alone in the marital bed while Vincent slept beside her, a question began to grow in her mind like a weed. Why did she feel so empty? The first year passed in a routine of social events, Vincent's business trips, and lonely afternoons when Eleanor read books or embroidered cushions. She tried to convince herself she was happy. After all, she had everything a woman could desire: a successful husband, a beautiful home, financial security, social respect. But there was something wrong with her, because deep in her chest, a restlessness she couldn't name was growing. Clarissa visited her regularly, always with stories of her turbulent relationships, her professional adventures, her plans to travel the world. She would look at Eleanor with a mixture of admiration and pity that made her friend uncomfortable. "You have everything, Ellie," she would say, "but you look like you've lost the sparkle in your eyes." Eleanor would deny it, say everything was fine, that it was just the natural adjustment of marriage. But when Clarissa left, she would look in the mirror and see what her friend saw: a beautiful, well-dressed, well-cared-for woman who seemed to be fading from the inside out. The second year was worse. Matilda began to ask discreet questions about babies, make comments about how lovely it would be to be a grandmother, hint about the biological clock. Vincent responded to these provocations vaguely, saying they had time, that there was no rush, that God would give them children when the time was right. But Eleanor knew that to have children, they first needed to have an intimate life, and that was still completely unexplored territory between them. She tried to get closer a few times. One night she wore a more daring nightgown she had bought in secret. Vincent praised her, said she looked beautiful, but just hugged her and commented on a film he had seen on television. Another time she lay closer to him, trying to start a conversation about intimacy. He kissed her on the forehead and said he loved her too much to degrade what they had with carnal impulses. Gradually, Eleanor began to question herself. Perhaps the problem was her, perhaps she wasn't beautiful enough, or desirable enough, or perhaps there was something fundamentally wrong with her femininity. She started observing other women, trying to understand what they had that she didn't. She began to look in the mirror for flaws, wondering if Vincent was disgusted by her, if he regretted marrying her. The third year brought a loneliness she had not imagined possible within a marriage. Eleanor and Vincent lived like two polite strangers sharing the same space. He left for work in the morning, returned at night. They had dinner together, discussing trivialities, watched television on the living room sofa, and went to sleep like siblings in a double bed. Weekends were filled with social commitments, where they played the role of the perfect couple for audiences who envied their apparent harmony. It was when Vincent suggested the spiritual retreat in the Cotswolds that Eleanor felt for the first time in years a flicker of hope. Perhaps there, away from their routine, away from family pressures, they could finally have a real conversation. Perhaps Vincent would open up, explain his feelings, and they would find a path to the intimacy she secretly longed for, even without knowing quite what it would be like. Hopewell Manor was nestled in the hills, a paradisiacal place with cozy cottages, nature trails, and a stunning view of the valley. The retreat promised to rekindle the flame of conjugal love through group dynamics, holistic therapies, and moments of spiritual reflection. There were 12 couples participating, most with similar problems: routine, distance, lack of communication. In the first few days, Eleanor was encouraged. The activities were interesting. The other couples seemed committed to improving their relationships, and Vincent participated in everything with his usual politeness. But when it came to the more intimate dynamics, when the therapists suggested exercises involving touch, looking into each other's eyes, sharing deep feelings, Vincent would shut down. He participated mechanically, said the right words, but Eleanor felt he was there only to fulfill a duty. On the third night, during a candlelit outdoor dinner, while the other couples chatted animatedly about their discoveries and progress, Eleanor watched Vincent talking to another participant about investments in the pharmaceutical market. He seemed more animated, talking about work, than at any moment since they had arrived. It was then that she saw Dante Ferris for the first time. He was on the other side of the terrace, speaking on his mobile phone with a serious expression. Tall, dark-haired, with slightly long hair, and a presence that commanded attention even from a distance. He wore casual clothes, but there was something in his posture that indicated power, control. When he ended the call, his eyes scanned the area and settled on Eleanor for a moment that felt eternal. She quickly looked away, feeling her heart race for no apparent reason. Vincent continued talking about stocks and corporate mergers, completely oblivious to the turmoil that had settled in his wife's chest. That night, lying next to a placidly sleeping Vincent, Eleanor couldn't get the intense gaze of the unknown man out of her mind. There was something in those eyes that had touched her in a way she hadn't experienced in years, an instant connection that frightened and fascinated her at the same time. The next day, she discovered that Dante Ferris was the businessman who financed the retreat, the owner of a corporate conglomerate known for his almost obsessive discretion. He rarely gave interviews, avoided social events, and when he did appear in public, it was always in a controlled and calculated manner. He was just passing through, taking care of some business related to the property. Eleanor tried to ignore the strange attraction she felt, to concentrate on the retreat's activities, to give one last chance to the marriage she had so desired. But when Vincent once again dodged an intimacy exercise, claiming discomfort with unnecessary exposure, something inside her began to definitively break. It was on the fourth night that everything fell apart. The group had participated in a dynamic called Rediscovering Passion, where couples were supposed to share their first moments of mutual attraction. One by one, husbands and wives told touching stories of first dates, first kisses, the magic of the early days of their relationships. When it was Vincent and Eleanor's turn, he spoke perfunctorily about his immediate admiration for her purity and good breeding, as if he were describing the qualities of a product in a business meeting. Eleanor tried to add something more intimate, more truthful, but the words simply wouldn't come out. How could she speak of passion when she had never experienced anything like it? How could she invent moments of mutual desire when Vincent had treated her like a sister from day one? The awkward silence that followed was broken by the facilitator, a kind psychologist who suggested that perhaps they needed a moment alone to reconnect with their emotions. The other couples looked at them with a mixture of pity and discomfort, and Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with shame. When the activity ended and the couples dispersed across the terrace, Vincent simply said, "That was tiring. I'm going to rest a bit before dinner." And he headed to their cottage as if nothing important had happened. Eleanor stood there watching the other women being hugged and kissed by their husbands, seeing the natural intimacy that existed between them, and for the first time in 3 years she allowed herself to admit the truth. Her marriage was a lie. Not because of Vincent's malice, not because of her incompetence, but because there was simply no true love there. There was convention, tradition, family expectations, but there was no passion, desire, or even genuine affection. Clarissa appeared at her side, as she always did in difficult moments. The two had met again at the retreat by coincidence. Clarissa was there accompanying a businessman boyfriend who had decided to invest in personal growth. "Want to get some air?" her friend asked, sensing Eleanor's emotional state. They walked in silence through the manor's gardens until they reached an old greenhouse, apparently abandoned, covered in vines and surrounded by flower beds that had seen better days. The place had a romantic melancholy, with its fogged glass walls and rusted iron frame that told stories of a time when someone cared for those plants with love. "Ellie, what's going on?" Clarissa asked when they finally sat on a stone bench among pots of withered flowers. And then, like a dam finally giving way to the pressure of accumulated water, Eleanor broke down. The tears came first, silent and desperate, followed by sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. Clarissa hugged her, stroking her hair as they did when they were teenagers, waiting patiently for her friend to find the words. "My husband doesn't touch me," Eleanor said finally, her voice broken with emotion. "In 3 years of marriage, he has never touched me, never wanted me, never even tried. I'm still a virgin, Clarissa. At 29, married for 3 years, I'm still a virgin because my husband feels no desire for me." Clarissa's eyes widened, clearly shocked. "What? Do you mean, Ellie? That's not possible. You live together, sleep in the same bed. We sleep like siblings. He treats me as if I were a sister, or worse, as if I were a porcelain doll that might break if touched. He talks about purity, about spiritual love, about respect, but I know those are excuses. The truth is he doesn't desire me. Maybe he never did. Maybe he married me just because I was what his family expected, the perfect, decorative wife." The words poured out in a torrent, as if Eleanor had been holding back this confession for years. "I feel like an object, Clarissa, like a beautiful adornment in his life. He shows me off at social events, praises me in front of others, but when we're alone, it's as if I'm invisible. I've tried to get closer, tried to talk about it, even tried to seduce him, but he always finds a polite way to push me away. Have you ever thought that maybe he has a problem, some medical or psychological issue?" "I've thought of everything. I thought maybe he was ill, or maybe he was gay and forcing himself to live a lie because of family pressure. But it's not that. He simply doesn't see me as a woman. I'm a symbol to him, not a person of flesh and blood with desires and needs." Eleanor stood up and began to walk nervously among the plants, gesticulating as she spoke. "And the worst part is, I started to believe the problem was me, that I wasn't pretty enough or feminine enough or interesting enough. I started looking in the mirror for flaws, trying to understand why my own husband can't desire me. Ellie, that's absurd. You're beautiful, intelligent, caring. Then why, Clarissa? Why did he marry me if he feels nothing? Why does he keep me in this life of lies, and why do I allow it? Eleanor's voice was rising, all the accumulated anger and frustration finally finding an outlet. Sometimes I lie in bed next to him, listening to him breathe, and I want to scream. I want to shake him and ask if I exist, if he even sees me as a human being. You need to talk to him, for real. Put your cards on the table. I've tried. Every time I bring it up, he changes the subject, or gives me those little kisses on the forehead, and talks about how our love is pure and elevated, as if I were a saint, not a woman. Eleanor stopped in front of a climbing vine that grew rampant up the glass wall, its red flowers contrasting with the green leaves. You know what's saddest? I don't even know what desire feels like anymore. I stood in church promising to love, honor, and obey, but I've never experienced what it means to truly want someone. I've never felt my heart race from a touch, never felt those butterflies people describe when they talk about attraction. But do you feel anything for Vincent? The question caught Eleanor off guard. She fell silent for a long moment, truly thinking about the answer. I like him, or at least I did. He's polite, respectful. He's never mistreated me. But love, I don't know what love is anymore, Clarissa. How can I love someone who has never allowed me to truly know him? How can I love someone who has kept me at a distance for 3 years? And what are you going to do? Eleanor turned to her friend, her eyes red, but determined. I don't know. For the first time in my life, I don't know what the next step is. My mother would be horrified if she knew the things I'm saying. My father, well, he wouldn't even notice. The whole of society would judge me for not being satisfied with a perfect husband. But I can't stand pretending everything is fine anymore. Are you thinking about leaving him? I don't even know if I have the courage for that. I was raised to be a wife, Clarissa. I don't have my own profession. I have no financial independence. I have no place in the world outside of this marriage. If I leave, what would I be? A divorcee at 29, dependent on my parents' goodwill, the subject of high society gossip for the rest of my life. Eleanor sat down on the bench again, exhausted by the weight of her own sincerity. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better to be born in another time, when women at least had the excuse that they couldn't choose. I theoretically can choose, but I wasn't prepared for it. I don't know how to live alone. I don't know how to earn money. I don't even know who I am outside the role of the obedient daughter and the decorative wife. But you're here, talking about it, acknowledging the problem. That's already a first step. Is it? Or am I just whining like a spoiled child who can't get what she wants? Ellie, wanting to be loved and desired by your own husband isn't a whim. It's the least anyone should expect from a marriage. At that moment, a noise from outside made them look toward the greenhouse door. Clarissa got up to check but saw no one. Must have been an animal, she said, returning to the bench. Eleanor continued speaking as if the words were therapeutic. What hurts the most is the loneliness, you know? I'm surrounded by people. I have a house full of staff. I have visitors constantly. I attend social events every week. But I feel completely alone. It's like I'm a ghost in my own life. And how does it feel being here at this retreat? Worse, because I see other couples touching each other naturally, looking at each other with affection, showing intimacy, and I realize just how artificial my marriage is. Vincent is here because our families thought it would be good for our image. He participates in the activities as if he's fulfilling a work obligation. Eleanor closed her eyes and took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the flowers around her. Sometimes I fantasize about what it would be like to be touched by someone who really wanted me, what it would be like to feel hands exploring me out of desire, not obligation, what it would be like to be looked at as a woman, not a doll. Eleanor, I know this sounds terrible coming from a married woman, but I have to say it, because if I keep this inside any longer, I'll go mad. She opened her eyes and stared at her friend. I sometimes dream about men I don't know. I dream that I'm touched, kissed, desired. And when I wake up next to Vincent, who doesn't even notice I exist, I feel a terrible shame, as if I'm a wanton woman for having these thoughts. You're not wanton for wanting to be a woman, Ellie. Am I not? Then why do I feel so guilty? Why do I have the impression that I'm betraying my vows just by wanting more from life? Clarissa took her friend's hands. Because you were raised to be content with little, to think that having a respectable husband was all a woman could aspire to. But you're discovering that you're so much more than that. And now what? What do I do with this discovery? How do I deal with this restlessness that's growing inside me? First, you stop blaming yourself. Then, you decide if you want to keep living this life or if you want to fight for something different. Fight how? I don't even know where to begin. Start by being honest with yourself, admitting what you truly want, not what they think you should want. Eleanor fell silent, observing the flowers that grew wild around the greenhouse. There was something liberating about this abandoned place, where nature had reclaimed control and the plants grew without pruning or limitations. I want to feel, she said finally. I want to feel desire, passion, even pain, if necessary. I want to know what it's like to love someone who loves me back. I want to discover who I am when I'm not playing a role. Then maybe it's time to stop playing. Eleanor looked at Clarissa with a mixture of gratitude and terror. For the first time in years, she had said out loud what she really thought, and the sky hadn't fallen. Her friend hadn't judged or condemned her. Perhaps there really was a possibility of a different life, more authentic, more alive. I'm scared, she confessed. Scared of what? Of discovering I don't know how to live outside this golden cage, of hurting the people I love, of being judged, of being alone forever. And are you scared of continuing as you are? Eleanor didn't need to think about the answer. Yes, much more. They sat in silence for a few minutes, absorbing the weight of that conversation. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange hues that reflected off the greenhouse glass, creating a play of light and shadow that made the atmosphere almost magical. Thank you, Eleanor said finally. For what? For listening without judging. For not telling me I should be grateful for what I have. For letting me be honest. That's what real friends do. When they stood up to leave, Eleanor felt different, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. She had crossed a line by admitting her true feelings, and she knew she could no longer pretend everything was fine. The confession had unleashed something inside her, an energy that had been dormant for years. What she didn't know was that her words had been heard by someone other than Clarissa. On the other side of the glass wall, a man had listened to every syllable of her desperate confession, and that listening would change the course of her life irrevocably. Dante Ferris had gone to the greenhouse to smoke, away from the prying eyes of the retreat participants. It was a habit he kept strictly private, one of the few vices he still allowed himself. He had been there for a few minutes when he heard the women's voices approaching, and he was about to retreat discreetly when he recognized the voice of one of the retreat participants, Eleanor Marlowe, the pharmacist's wife, a woman who had caught his attention from the first day, not just for her obvious beauty, but for something in her eyes that suggested hidden depths. There was something familiar about her, a restrained sadness he recognized because he had felt it himself. When she began to speak about her intimate life, or lack thereof, Dante found himself paralyzed, unable to move away. It wasn't voyeurism, but because every word she spoke echoed pains he himself had experienced, albeit differently. The loneliness within a relationship, the feeling of being seen as a symbol, not a person, the hunger for authenticity in a world of appearances. When Eleanor mentioned her dreams of unknown men, when she confessed her hunger to be touched and desired, something visceral stirred within him. It wasn't just physical attraction, though that existed. It was recognition. It was the sudden understanding that he had found someone as lost as he was, as hungry for real life as he himself was. Dante Ferris was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. At 42, he had built a business empire from almost nothing, through determination, intelligence, and an almost supernatural ability to read people and situations. But power and money had not been enough to save him from the greatest failure of his life, his marriage to Adriana. Adriana had been his wife for 5 years, a brilliant and ambitious woman he had met at university. In the beginning, they were equals in their hunger for success, in their willingness to fight for what they wanted. But as Dante grew richer and more powerful, Adriana lost her way. The money and fame transformed her into someone he didn't recognize, addicted to drugs, to parties, to scandals that threatened the reputation he had fought so hard to build. In the final years of their marriage, they lived like hostile strangers. Dante tried to help her, took her to rehab clinics, hired the best psychiatrists, did everything in his power. But Adriana was determined to self-destruct, and eventually she began to attack him too, accusing him of coldness, of being a soulless man, of destroying everything he touched. Their last fight had been terrible. Adriana was under the influence of some substance, screaming incoherent accusations, breaking objects, threatening to kill herself to show the world what kind of monster he was. Dante, exhausted after years of trying to save her, finally lost his patience and said the words he would never forgive himself for. "You are a broken woman, and I don't fix people." 3 days later, Adriana was found dead in the hotel room where she was staying. Accidental overdose, the doctors said. But Dante knew his last. Words had been the final push she needed to give up on life for good. Since then, he had closed himself off from romantic relationships. There were occasional women, of course, but nothing that involved genuine emotion. He focused on work, on expanding his businesses, on maintaining his carefully constructed public image. It was easier to be the mysterious billionaire no one really knew than to risk connecting with someone again and failing to protect them. But something in Eleanor's broken voice, in the raw honesty of her confession, touched a part of him that had been dead since the tragedy with Adriana. He recognized in her the hunger for life that he himself felt, the rebellion against an existence without passion, without real purpose beyond social conventions. When the women left the greenhouse, Dante stood there smoking, processing what he had heard. Eleanor Marlowe was being wasted in a loveless marriage, withering away in a life that didn't deserve her. And Vincent Marlowe. Dante knew the pharmacist's reputation, a cold, calculating man who treated even business as a spiritual matter to justify his lack of passion for anything. An idea began to form in Dante's mind. Dangerous, complicated, but irresistible. He had heard a woman pleading for liberation, even if she herself didn't know that's what she was doing, and he had the power to offer it to her. It wouldn't be charity, it would be something far more selfish, because Dante recognized in Eleanor not just a woman who needed to be awakened, but someone who could awaken something in him too. Someone who could make him remember what it was like to be truly alive. From that moment on, Dante Ferris decided he would get to know Eleanor Marlowe, and that, one way or another, he would save her from the golden prison in which she lived, even if it meant breaking a few rules along the way. The next day, Eleanor woke with a strange feeling, as if something fundamental had changed during the night. The conversation in the greenhouse had released something within her, a new awareness of her own dissatisfaction that could no longer be ignored. For the first time in years, she had told someone the truth about her life, and she discovered that the world had not ended because of it. Vincent was in the bathroom when she woke up, quietly humming, a hymn as he did every morning. The sound, which she once found comforting, now irritated her deeply. How could he be so calm, so satisfied with a life she considered a lie? During breakfast on the main terrace of the manor, Eleanor observed the other couples with new eyes, no longer with the veiled envy she felt before, but with analytical curiosity. How had they managed to build real intimacy? How could they touch each other so naturally, smile at one another with genuine complicity? What did they have that she and Vincent had failed to develop? "You're quiet." "Today," Vincent commented, methodically slicing his grapefruit. "Did you sleep well?" "I slept," she replied without elaborating, concentrating on a couple at the next table who were laughing at some private joke. "Today's activity promises to be interesting. Non-verbal communication," they said. Vincent seemed genuinely excited by the prospect. "It will be a good opportunity to practice our attunement." Eleanor almost laughed at the irony. Attunement, as if they were musical instruments that just needed to be tuned to produce harmony. The reality was they were like two completely different instruments trying to play the same song, an impossible task by its very nature. It was when she looked up from her plate that she saw him again. Dante Ferris was talking with the retreat organizers near the reception, gesturing discreetly but authoritatively. Even from a distance, there was something magnetic about him, a presence that seemed to occupy more space than his physical body warranted. When he turned and his eyes met hers, Eleanor felt an electric shock run through her entire body. He stared at her for a moment that seemed eternal, with an intensity that made her feel completely exposed, as if he could read every secret thought she held. Then he gave a slight nod of his head, an almost imperceptible greeting, and returned his attention to the conversation. "Eleanor, I asked if you wanted more coffee," Vincent said, following her gaze. "Ah, that's the businessman who funds this place. Dante Ferris. An interesting man from what I've heard, very private." "Yes," she murmured, forcing herself to look at her husband. "Very private." During the morning's activity, Eleanor had trouble concentrating. The dynamic involved exercises of looking into your partner's eyes for prolonged periods, trying to communicate emotions without words. When she looked into Vincent's blue eyes, she saw only politeness, a gentle formality that left her frustrated. He, in turn, seemed genuinely convinced they were connecting on a higher spiritual level. "You have beautiful eyes," he said during one of the exercises, in the same tone he would use to praise the decor of a restaurant. "Thank you," she replied automatically, feeling like an actress reciting memorized lines. During the break, she went out into the garden for some fresh air and a moment of solitude. She was sitting on a bench under a leafy tree when she heard footsteps on the grass behind her. "Excuse me." She turned to find Dante Ferris standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, a gentle but cautious expression on his face. Up close, he was even more impressive, tall, dark, with deep-set eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. There were lines around his eyes that suggested someone who had laughed a lot at some point in his life, but also a tension in his jaw that indicated someone used to controlling difficult situations. "Mrs. Marlowe, isn't it? Sorry to disturb you, I'm Dante Ferris." Eleanor stood up, automatically smoothing her dress, a reflex from years of social training. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Ferris. You're not disturbing me." "May I?" He gestured toward the bench. She nodded, and they sat with a respectful distance between them. For a few moments, they were silent, watching the other retreat participants walk through the gardens. "How are you finding the program?" Dante finally asked. "Interesting," Eleanor replied, using the same vague word she used in all social situations when she didn't want to reveal anything real. A diplomatic answer. There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "I imagine it's difficult to be sincere about intimate matters with strangers." Something in the way he said sincere made Eleanor shiver. There was a suggestion there, as if he knew more than he should. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, trying to decipher his expression. "Have you ever participated in something like this before?" "No, I'm more the type to observe than to participate." He turned to look at her directly. "But sometimes observation reveals more than participation." There was a strange weight to that sentence, a significance Eleanor couldn't fully grasp. She felt as if she were in a conversation with sub-layers that were beyond her comprehension. "Are you married?" she asked, and immediately regretted the personal question. "I was." The answer was curt, final. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be indiscreet." "You weren't. It's a natural question." Dante looked down at his hands, and Eleanor noticed he wore no wedding ring. "My wife died 3 years ago." "I'm so sorry." "Thank you." He looked back at her. "And you? Are you enjoying being married?" The question took Eleanor by surprise. No one had ever asked her that so directly. People assumed that because she was married to a successful man, she was automatically happy. "It's an experience," she said carefully. Another diplomatic answer. This time he smiled, and the smile completely transformed his face, revealing a devastating masculine beauty. "You must be very good at social gatherings." "I was trained for it," she replied without thinking, and was surprised by the honesty of her own answer. Trained. He repeated the word as if savoring its meaning. An interesting word. As if marriage were a job. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. There was something dangerous about this conversation, an intimacy that was developing far too quickly. Perhaps I chose my words poorly. Or perhaps you chose exactly the right words. They were interrupted by the approach of Vincent, who was walking across the garden with his characteristic posture, upright, controlled, a faint, formal smile on his lips. "My love," he said as he approached, "they were looking for you for the next activity." His gaze settled on Dante with polite formality. "Mr. Ferris, I presume. Vincent Marlowe. A pleasure to finally meet you." Dante stood and extended his hand. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Marlowe. Your wife was just telling me about the retreat's activities. Eleanor has always been very sociable." Vincent put his arm around his wife's waist in a possessive yet unaffectionate manner. "We hope you are satisfied with the quality of the program here." "I'm impressed," Dante replied, but his eyes remained fixed on Eleanor. "Everything has exceeded my expectations." There was something in the way he said that which made Eleanor feel as if she were part of two different conversations, a superficial one between the men and another, full of dangerous subtext, between her and Dante. "Well, we don't want to be late," Vincent said, already heading back toward the main building. Eleanor followed her husband but couldn't resist a glance back. Dante was still standing in the same spot, watching her walk away with an expression she couldn't decipher, but which made her heart race in a way it hadn't in years. Throughout the afternoon, she struggled to concentrate on the activities. Her mind kept returning to that strange conversation, to the way Dante had seemed to see right through her, as if he knew secrets she didn't even know she possessed. That evening, during dinner, she noticed that Dante had left the manor. One of the organizers mentioned he had business to attend to in a nearby town and would only return the next day. Eleanor was surprised by the disappointment she felt upon hearing this. "You've been acting strange," Clarissa commented when they met after dinner. "Did something happen after our talk yesterday?" "Why do you ask?" "Because you're different, more alert, as if something has awakened." Eleanor didn't know how to explain what she had felt during her conversation with Dante without sounding like a married woman who was becoming interested in another man, because that was exactly what was happening, and she knew it even as she tried to deny it to herself. "Clarissa, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you know when you're attracted to someone?" Clarissa laughed. "Wow, what a question. Why do you want to know?" "Just curious. I've never really experienced it." Her friend stopped laughing when she realized Eleanor was serious. "Are you feeling attracted to someone?" "I don't know. I don't even know what it's supposed to feel like." Eleanor looked around to make sure no one was listening. When you see a man and your heart starts racing for no reason, when you can't stop thinking about him, even when you try not. 2, when you feel something in your stomach like butterflies, is that attraction? That's attraction, yes, and also the beginning of a lot of trouble. Clarissa studied her carefully. "Ellie, please tell me you're not getting involved with someone here." "I'm not getting involved with anyone. I'm just trying to understand things I've never felt before. And these feelings, who are they about?" Eleanor hesitated. Part of her wanted to confess everything to Clarissa, as she had done the night before in the greenhouse. But another, more cautious part noticed something different in her friend's behavior since they had arrived. At the retreat, a subtle watchfulness, an excessive attention to her movements and conversations. "It's not about anyone specific," she lied. "It's just that, after our talk yesterday, I started to question a lot of things, including what it would be like to feel real desire." Clarissa seemed to relax slightly. "That's natural after everything you told me, but be careful not to confuse an awakening of feelings with an interest in specific people. That could be dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "You're a married woman, Ellie, with a reputation to protect, a social position to maintain. Any misstep could ruin your life." There was something in the way Clarissa said that which bothered Eleanor, a coldness almost like a veiled threat. Do you think I would do something reckless? I don't know. You're in a very vulnerable phase, discovering things about yourself, questioning your life. People in that state sometimes make decisions they later regret. Eleanor studied her friend's face, looking for signs that her suspicions were correct. Something was wrong here, a subtle but noticeable change in the dynamic between them. Clarissa, can I trust you? What kind of question is that? We've been friends since we were teenagers. That's not an answer. Of course you can trust me, I'm just worried about you. But there was something in Clarissa's eyes that didn't match her words, a calculating coldness that Eleanor had never noticed before, or perhaps had never paid enough attention to see. That night, lying next to Vincent, who was sleeping as soundly as ever, Eleanor replayed all the conversations of the past few days. The confession in the greenhouse, the encounter with Dante, Clarissa's strange reaction. Something was happening that she didn't fully understand. Forces were moving around her that were beyond her control. For the first time in years, she felt truly awake, as if she had been sleeping through her entire marriage and was finally opening her eyes. It was a feeling that was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. The next day, Dante was back. Eleanor saw him during breakfast, talking with the organizers, and again she felt that flutter in her stomach that Clarissa had confirmed was attraction. He wore casual clothes, dark jeans and a white shirt. But there was something in the way he moved, in the natural confidence of his gestures, that set him apart from all the other men present. During the mornings, activity on rediscovering spontaneity, the couples were divided into smaller groups. By a coincidence that seemed orchestrated by fate, Eleanor and Vincent ended up in the same group as another couple whose personal coach was none other than Dante Ferris. The dynamic involved improvisation exercises, where participants had to react spontaneously to situations proposed by the facilitator. Vincent fared poorly in anything that required improvisation. He was a man who planned even casual conversations. Eleanor, on the other hand, discovered she had an easier time letting go when she didn't have time to self-censor. "Very good, Mrs. Marlowe," Dante said when she finished an exercise where she had to express anger without words. "You have much more fire inside you than you imagine." The word fire left his lips laden with a sensuality that made Eleanor shiver all over. Vincent, who never caught subtext, simply smiled with pride at his wife. "Eleanor has always been very talented," he said, "one of the qualities that attracted me to her from the beginning." "I can imagine," Dante replied, but his eyes remained fixed on Eleanor. "It must be difficult for a man to live up to such a talented woman." There was something in the way he hesitated before the word talented that made Eleanor understand he was talking about things far beyond artistic talent. Vincent, predictable in his obtuseness, completely missed the insinuation. During the next exercise, Eleanor was paired with Dante for a communication through touch dynamic. They were to communicate using only touches on their hands and forearms, conveying different emotions. When Dante touched her hand for the first time, Eleanor felt an electric charge shoot up her arm and spread through her entire body. It wasn't just the physical touch, it was the intention behind it, the way his fingers moved, over her skin as if mapping unknown territory. "Now convey tranquility," the facilitator instructed. Dante's fingers slid gently over the palm of her hand, a caress so intimate that Eleanor had to fight not to audibly moan. Their eyes met, and she saw in his an intensity that made her understand he was feeling the exact same thing. "Now, desire." The instruction caught them both off guard. Dante hesitated for a fraction of a second, then his fingers traced the outline of her wrist, where he knew he could feel her racing heart. Eleanor felt as if she were on fire from within, a completely new sensation that scared and excited her at the same time. "Very good," said the facilitator, apparently oblivious to the sexual tension that had settled between them. "You two have a very interesting natural connection." When the activity ended and they separated, Eleanor noticed her hands were trembling. Vincent approached, commenting on the effectiveness of the exercises, but she could barely focus on his words. Her mind was completely consumed by the memory of Dante's touch, the way he had looked at her, the certainty that something irreversible had happened between them. "Are you all right?" Vincent asked, noticing her agitation. I am, just a little tired. Perhaps you should rest a bit before lunch. Eleanor nodded and headed to the cottage they shared, but instead of resting, she locked herself in the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were shining in a way she hadn't seen in years, her cheeks were flushed, and there was something about her face that seemed more alive, more awake. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing real desire. And it was terrible and wonderful at the same time. Outside, Vincent was talking on the phone to someone about the evolution of the process and keeping everything under control. Eleanor caught only fragments of the conversation, but something in the way he spoke, more animated and authoritative than she had ever heard him, aroused a disturbing suspicion. There was more going on at this retreat than she had imagined, and she was beginning to realize that she might not be just a participant, but a piece in a game far more complex than she had suspected. That afternoon, Eleanor couldn't participate in the scheduled activities. She claimed a severe headache and retired to the cottage, but in reality, she needed time to process the whirlwind of emotions that the morning's dynamic had stirred. Dante's simple touch had revealed a world of sensations she didn't know existed, and now she felt like a teenager discovering her own body. Lying in bed, she tried to read a book, but the words danced on the page without making sense. Her mind kept returning to the way Dante had touched her hand, how his eyes had locked onto hers with an intensity that seemed to burn. There was something about that man that awakened her in a primal, visceral way, as if he could see through all the layers of breeding and social convention that enveloped her. Vincent returned in the late afternoon, enthusiastically recounting the day's discoveries. He spoke of breathing techniques, the importance of nonverbal communication, how he was evolving spiritually through the proposed practices. Eleanor listened with growing irritation, noticing how hollow and rehearsed each of his words sounded, as if he were reciting a self-help manual. "You missed a very interesting session on personal boundaries," he said as he changed for dinner. The therapist spoke about the importance of respecting a spouse's boundaries, of not forcing intimacies that could be detrimental to the couple's spiritual growth. Eleanor rose from the bed with a sudden energy. Detrimental how? Well, he explained that some people need more time to open up completely, that forcing physical proximity before a person is spiritually ready can cause trauma, block the development of true intimacy. And you agree with that? Vincent stopped buttoning his shirt and looked at her in surprise. Of course I agree. I've always said our relationship is special precisely because it transcends basic carnal needs. Basic carnal needs. Eleanor repeated the words slowly. Is that how you see sex? Eleanor, you've never been interested in these matters before. Why are you bringing this up now? Because maybe I'm finally paying attention to what you say. She approached him, studying his expression carefully. Vincent, have you ever desired me? Physically? He was visibly uncomfortable with the direct question. I love you, Eleanor. Our love is pure, elevated. That's not what I asked. Why do you want to discuss these things? Aren't we happy as we are? You are happy. I'm questioning whether I am. Vincent finished dressing in silence, clearly disturbed by the direction of the conversation. When he was ready to leave, he stopped at the door and turned to her. Eleanor, I hope you're not being influenced by some of the other participants here. Some women have very liberal ideas about marriage, and that could be dangerous for someone like you. Someone like me? Pure, innocent, preserved from the corruptions of the modern world. After he left, Eleanor stood in the middle of the room, processing that conversation. For the first time, she had confronted Vincent directly about their intimate life, and his response had confirmed her worst suspicions. He truly saw her as a porcelain doll that could break if touched in an impure way. She decided to skip dinner and went for a walk in the gardens. The manor was beautiful at dusk, with soft lights illuminating the paths and the scent of jasmine in the air. She followed a path she didn't know, letting her instincts guide her, and ended up at a small viewpoint that offered a spectacular view of the valley. Fleeing the festivities. She turned to find Dante standing a few feet behind her. He had emerged from the shadows so silently, he seemed to have materialized out of thin air. I wasn't hungry, she said, trying to sound casual despite her racing heart. Neither was I. He approached and stood beside her, contemplating the landscape. "Sometimes I need silence to think." They stood in silence for a few minutes, but it was a silence charged with tension, with unsaid things that hung in the air between them. Eleanor was intensely aware of his proximity, of the warmth emanating from his body, of the masculine scent that mixed something expensive with a hint of cigarette smoke. "May I ask you a personal question?" Dante said finally. "You may." "Are you happy?" The question was so direct it caught Eleanor off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes I see a sadness in your eyes that I recognize, the sadness of someone living the wrong life." Eleanor stared at him, trying to understand how a man she barely knew could read her so easily. "And you? Are you happy?" "No. But at least I'm honest about it." "Honest with whom?" "With myself. With you now." He turned to look at her directly. "Eleanor, may I speak frankly?" Something in the way he said her name for the first time without the formal Mrs. made her stomach clench. "Speak. I heard you the night before last in the greenhouse. It wasn't my intention to spy, but I was there smoking when you and your friend arrived." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "You heard what?" "Everything." His voice was gentle but firm. "Your confession about your marriage, about feeling invisible, about never having been touched by the man you've shared a bed with for 3 years. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with shame. She wanted to run, to hide, but something in Dante's expression kept her rooted to the spot. "I should be shocked, or at least surprised," he continued, "but I'm not. Because from the first moment I saw you, I realized you were a woman being wasted, a woman who was slowly dying inside. You don't know me, don't I? Then tell me where I'm wrong." He took a step toward her. "You married because it was what was expected of you. You chose a man your family approved of, who seemed safe, who promised a life without turmoil. But you discovered that security is not the same as happiness, and now you're trapped in a life that isn't yours." Every word was a sharp blade cutting through the layers of denial she had built up over the years. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I recognize an imprisoned soul when I see one, because I've lived in a golden cage myself, and I know how suffocating it is." He was close enough now that she could see the lines around his eyes, "and because since I first saw you, I haven't been able to stop thinking about what it would be like to set you free." Eleanor's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Set me free how?" "By showing you what it's like to be truly seen, truly touched, truly desired." The audacity of the suggestion should have shocked her, but instead it awakened something primal within her, a hunger she had denied for so long she no longer knew it existed. "I'm married," she said, but her voice came out weak, unconvincing. "To a man who doesn't touch you, who doesn't know you, who treats you like a decorative object." Dante raised his hand and lightly touched her face, just enough to make her skin tingle. "That's not a marriage, Eleanor, it's a comfortable prison." She should have pulled away. She should have run back to the cottage, to the suffocating safety of her controlled life. But instead, she involuntarily leaned into his touch, starved for real human contact. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Do what?" "Be different from who I've always been. Want things I shouldn't want." "You don't need to be different. You just need to be yourself." He caressed her cheek with his thumb, a touch so light it was almost torture. "The real you, not the edited version you present to the world." "And what if I don't know who the real person is?" "Then we'll find out together." Before she could fully process what was happening, Dante leaned in and kissed her. It was not a gentle or hesitant kiss, but a hungry one, charged with a passion that struck her like lightning. Eleanor had never been kissed like that, with real desire, with urgency, as if she were something he needed to survive. When they broke apart, she was trembling. "I can't." "You can. You are." He held her face in his hands. "For the first time in your life, you're doing what you want, not what you should. This is wrong." "Is it? Or is it the first right thing you've done in years?" Eleanor closed her eyes, battling forces she didn't fully comprehend. Her entire upbringing, all the values she had been taught, screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, a betrayal of everything she was. But for the first time in her adult life, she felt truly alive. "Come with me," Dante said. "Where?" "To a place where we can talk without being interrupted." She knew she shouldn't. She knew she was crossing a line that would change everything, but the alternative was to go back to the cottage, to Vincent, to the life of lies she could no longer bear. "All right," she said. Dante led her down a less traveled path to one of the more remote guest houses on the property. It was an elegant bungalow, discreetly luxurious with a stunning view of the mountains. When they entered, Eleanor noticed the refined furniture, the impeccable decor, clearly not standard accommodation for retreat participants. "Is this where you're staying?" "It is." He closed the door behind them but didn't approach her. "Would you like something to drink?" "No, thank you." They stood in the middle of the living room, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation. The tension that had built outside seemed to have doubled in intensity within this private space. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said. "Anything you want." "Why me?" "You must know many women who are more interesting, more experienced." Dante approached slowly, as if not to frighten her. "Do you want to know the truth?" "I do. Because when I heard you speaking in the greenhouse, I recognized something I hadn't seen in a long time. Authenticity, real pain, someone who was still capable of feeling, despite everything." He stopped in front of her but didn't touch her. "And because there's something about you that awakens something in me I thought was dead." "What?" "The desire to protect someone, to care, to make someone feel truly precious, not just decorative." Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her that way, as if she were a whole and complete person, not just a social function. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Of what?" "Of everything. Of how I feel when I'm near you, of how this might end, of discovering I don't know. How to live outside the cage I've always been in." Dante raised his hand and wiped away a tear that was trickling down her cheek. "Eleanor, I won't lie to you. This is complicated, dangerous, and it could end badly for both of us. But if you continue living as you are, it will end badly anyway. Only it will be a slow death, not a quick fire. And if I choose the fire, then we'll burn together." This time, when he kissed her, she didn't hesitate. She surrendered completely to this new sensation, to the warmth spreading through her body, to the hunger she never knew she possessed. When his hands touched her waist, she didn't pull away. When he pulled her closer, she allowed herself to melt against his chest. "Are you sure?" he asked against her lips. "No, but I'm going to do it anyway." Dante led her to the bedroom, an intimate space lit by the soft glow of lamps. There were fresh flowers in a vase on the dresser, a bottle of champagne on ice, as if he had known this night would be special. "Did you plan this?" she asked. "I hoped for it," he corrected, "from the moment I heard you speak of your secret dreams." Eleanor should have felt manipulated, but instead she felt desired in a way she had never experienced. Someone had planned a seduction specifically for her, had thought about how to make this night memorable. When Dante began to unbutton her dress, his hands trembled slightly. "You're even more beautiful than I imagined," he murmured. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt truly seen, not as a decorative wife or an obedient daughter, but as a desirable woman, capable of awakening passion in a man who could have anyone. The rest of the night passed like a fever dream. Dante touched her as if she were a precious work of art, exploring every inch of her skin with a reverence that made her cry. When they finally came together, Eleanor understood for the first time what poets tried to describe when they spoke of two souls becoming one. It wasn't just the end of her physical virginity. It was the birth of a new version of herself, a woman she didn't know existed, a woman capable of feeling pleasure, of expressing desire, of being an active participant in her own happiness. When it was over, she lay in his arms, still processing the magnitude of what had happened. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, had experienced something that would make it impossible to return to her previous life. "What are you thinking?" Dante asked, stroking her hair. "That I don't know who I am anymore. You're exactly who you've always been. You're just allowing that person to emerge now." "And now? What happens now?" Dante was silent for a long moment. "Now you decide if you want to keep sleeping, or if you want to live awake. And if I choose to live awake, then we'll have to deal with the consequences, together." Outside, dawn was approaching, and Eleanor knew that in a few hours she would have to return to the cottage, to Vincent, to the life that now seemed like a distant fantasy. But for the first time in years she felt whole. She had discovered that she was capable of feeling, of loving, of being truly loved. What she didn't yet know was that Vincent already suspected her movements, and that Clarissa had been passing information about her emotional state to people who had very specific plans for her. The liberation she so longed for was just beginning, and the obstacles she would face would be far greater than she imagined. But at that moment, lying in Dante's arms, feeling like a woman for the first time in her life, nothing else mattered but the discovery that it was possible to be truly happy. Eleanor returned to the cottage in the early hours of the morning, when the sky was still tinged with pink and orange. Vincent was fast asleep, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife had spent the night discovering what it meant to be a real woman. She took a long shower, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened, observing in the mirror the subtle marks Dante's touch had left on her skin. For the first time in years, her reflection showed a woman who was alive. Her eyes shone in a new way, her skin seemed more luminous. There was an energy in her movements that hadn't existed before. She had crossed an irreversible line, and though she knew the consequences would come, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Vincent woke, up in a good mood, commenting on how well he had slept and making plans for the day's activities. Eleanor watched him as if seeing a stranger, this man who had shared her bed for 3 years but had never awakened in her even a fraction of what Dante had managed in a single night. "You look different today," Vincent commented as he shaved. "More radiant." If only he knew the reason for that radiance, Eleanor thought with bitter irony. "I slept well," she said simply. During breakfast, she searched for Dante with her eyes, but he didn't appear. The organizers mentioned that he had left early for business in a nearby town and would only return in the afternoon. His absence left Eleanor with a mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief at not having to immediately face the awkwardness of seeing him in public after the intimacy of the previous night, and disappointment at not being able to confirm through his eyes that it had all really happened. Clarissa approached during a break in the activities, with a worried expression that seemed forced. "Ellie, where were you last night? Vincent asked me if I knew anything." "Vincent asked you about me. He was worried when you didn't come back for dinner. He said you'd gone for a walk and hadn't returned." There was something in Clarissa's tone that alerted Eleanor's instincts. "And what did you tell him?" "That you were probably processing the emotions from the activities, that sometimes you need time alone." Clarissa studied her carefully. "Where were you really?" "Walking, thinking, trying to understand what's happening to me." "Ellie, promise me something." "What?" "That you won't do anything foolish. I know you're going through a difficult time questioning your marriage, but don't do anything you might regret later." Again, that strange tone, as if Clarissa knew more than she was letting on. Eleanor decided to test her suspicions. "Why do you care so much about what I do?" "We've been friends for years. Of course I care. But lately, you seem more interested in watching me than supporting me." Clarissa became visibly uncomfortable. "What a strange thing to say. I'm just trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "From yourself. From impulsive decisions that could ruin your life." Eleanor studied her friend's face, searching for signs of the person she had known since she was a teenager. But there was something different there, a calculating coldness that didn't match the spontaneous, warm Clarissa of before. "Clarissa, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you being paid to watch me?" The question caught Clarissa completely off guard. For a moment, her mask of friendly concern slipped, revealing an expression of guilt and panic. What an absurd question. Why would I be paid? "Because you've changed. Because you're here at this retreat by a very convenient coincidence. Because you ask too many questions and watch everything I do. Eleanor moved closer to her friend. And because Vincent doesn't seem the least bit surprised when you give him information about me. Clarissa tried to maintain her composure, but Eleanor could see she had hit the mark. Ellie, you're being paranoid. What's gotten into you? What's gotten into me is that I'm finally paying attention. Eleanor stepped away from her, and realizing that maybe I don't have as many friends as I thought. She walked away before Clarissa could respond, feeling a mixture of anger and betrayal. If her suspicions were correct, even her childhood friend was involved in whatever Vincent was plotting. The feeling of being manipulated, watched, controlled without her knowledge, awakened a fury she had never felt before. During the afternoon activity, Eleanor struggled to concentrate. Her mind was buzzing with questions about how many people around her were involved in some kind of plan she was unaware of. Vincent participated in the exercises with his usual calm, but she began to notice small details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way he observed everything around him, how he asked subtle questions about her feelings and reactions, how he seemed to be mentally documenting every change in her behavior. When Dante finally appeared late that afternoon, Eleanor felt immense relief. She had started to question whether the previous night had really happened or if it had been an elaborate dream. But when their eyes met across the terrace, his discreet smile confirmed that every moment had been real. He approached during the dinner break when she was alone in the garden. "How are you feeling?" "Confused. Scared. Alive." She looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Dante, I think something is very wrong here. Something beyond what we imagined." "What do you mean?" "Vincent is watching me differently. Clarissa is acting like a spy. I have the feeling I'm being manipulated, but I don't know for what." Dante grew serious. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. About your husband and about me." Something in his tone alerted all of Eleanor's instincts. "What?" "Vincent and I have known each other for a long time, before you were married, before I met you." Her heart pounded. "What do you mean?" 5 years ago, my wife Adriana was trying to launch a line of natural beauty products. She had developed innovative formulas, had important contracts lined up, interested investors, until Vincent Marlowe decided she was a threat to his family's pharmaceutical products. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What did he do? He used his family's influence to pressure suppliers, spread rumors about the quality of her products, sabotaged contracts. In 6 months, Adriana had lost everything. The company went bankrupt, the investors pulled out, and she never recovered from the blow. But that doesn't explain... Yes, it does. Because after that, Adriana started to self-destruct. Drugs, alcohol, a spiral of depression that I couldn't stop. And when she died, I swore that Vincent Marlowe would pay for what he had done. Eleanor backed away from him, feeling nauseous. "So I'm your revenge. All of this was planned." "It started that way," Dante admitted, and the brutal honesty in his voice was like a slap. "When I learned that Vincent had a young, beautiful wife who lived an isolated and unhappy life, I saw an opportunity to make him suffer as I had suffered. You used me. I intended to. But then I heard you in that greenhouse. I saw your pain. I got to know who you really are." He tried to approach her, but she moved away again. "Eleanor, what I feel for you is real. What happened between us is real. How can I believe you after this? Because I'm telling you the truth when I could have lied. Because I could have kept pretending it was a coincidence, but I chose to be honest." Eleanor sat on a nearby bench, trying to process this devastating revelation. The man she had fallen for, who had awakened her sexuality, who had shown her what it was like to be desired, had initially approached her as part of a revenge plot against her husband. "There's more," Dante said, sitting beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. "I've discovered some things about Vincent that you need to know. I don't know if I can handle any more revelations." "You can, because this concerns your freedom." He took a deep breath. "Vincent has been recording you for years. Hidden cameras in the house, in the bedroom, probably even here. Eleanor felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. That's impossible. I had a private investigator check. There are at least 15 devices scattered throughout your mansion. Vincent knows your every move, every private conversation, every moment of intimacy, or lack thereof. Why? Why would he want to? Control. And something else. There's a clause in his grandfather's will that you don't know about. An inheritance of £50 million that can only be accessed if you remain a virgin until the age of 30. Eleanor's world completely fell apart. What? Old man Marlowe was a religious fanatic. He believed that female purity had spiritual value. He left a fortune that can only be inherited if Vincent proves he kept his wife pure until she turned 30. The recordings are the proof. Eleanor stood up, pacing in circles, trying to absorb the magnitude of the betrayal. So I'm an investment, an insurance policy for an inheritance. You are a woman who has been used by the two men who should have protected you. By me initially, and by Vincent from the very beginning. The anger that consumed Eleanor was unlike anything she had ever felt. It wasn't the polite irritation she sometimes felt with the impositions of social life, but a primal, animalistic rage that made her tremble from head to toe. "Where is he now?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "Eleanor, where is he?" "In the administration office, talking to the organizers about extending the retreat." Eleanor strode toward the administrative building with Dante running after her. The wrath she felt was so intense she could barely see the path, guided only by the primitive need to confront the man who had turned her entire life into a sham. She found Vincent exactly where Dante had said, sitting at a conference table with 3 retreat organizers, discussing schedules and activities. When he saw her enter, he smiled with that usual politeness. "My love, what is it? You seem agitated." "I need to speak with you. Alone." Vincent looked at the organizers apologetically. "Could we continue this later?" When they were alone, Eleanor closed the door and turned to face him. "Tell me about the cameras." The change in Vincent's expression was instantaneous. The gentle politeness vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating she had never seen before. "I don't know what you're talking about. Tell me about the 15 cameras you installed in our house to watch me for these 3 years. Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying her with a coldness that made her realize she had never truly known this man. "Who told you that? Tell me about your grandfather's inheritance, about the clause that requires me to be a virgin until I'm 30 for you to receive 50 million. This time Vincent smiled, and there was something cruel in that smile. "You found out. So it's true." "Of course it's true." He stood up and began to walk around the table. "My grandfather may have been a religious fanatic, but he wasn't a fool. He knew that traditional values were being lost in the modern world. The clause was a way to ensure that at least one member of the family maintained high moral standards." "High moral standards." Eleanor repeated the words with contempt. "You spied on me, kept me in emotional captivity, turned our marriage into a performance, and you talk about morality? I protected you. From the world, from your own weaknesses, from the temptations that could corrupt you." Vincent stopped in front of her, "and it was working perfectly until you started being influenced by the wrong people." "The wrong people like who?" "Like Dante Ferris. Did you think I didn't know about your involvement?" Eleanor's blood ran cold. "How did you—" "The cameras aren't just in our house, my dear. They're in several strategic locations on this property as well." Vincent picked up a tablet from the table and showed it to her. "I can show you every moment of your little adventure last night if you like." Eleanor felt sick. "You're sick. I'm careful, and now you've forced me to take more drastic measures." "What measures?" "Well, technically you've violated the terms of the will. You are no longer a virgin, therefore you are no longer eligible for the inheritance." Vincent smiled again. "But accidents happen. People disappear, and traumatized widowers inherit everything automatically." The threat was clear, and for the first time, Eleanor felt real fear. Vincent wasn't just a controlling husband. He was a dangerous man capable of anything to protect his interests. "You wouldn't dare." "Don't test me, Eleanor. You have no idea what I'm capable of to protect my family and my assets." The door opened abruptly and Dante entered, followed by two men in suits whom Eleanor didn't recognize. "Actually, Vincent, we know exactly what you're capable of," Dante said, "including murdering your own wife when she becomes an obstacle." Vincent turned pale. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Adriana, about how you not only destroyed her company but also arranged the accident that caused her death." One of the men in suits introduced himself. "Mr. Marlowe, I'm a private investigator. I have evidence that you tampered with the drugs your victim used to use, increasing the concentration to ensure a fatal overdose." "That's absurd, I didn't—" "We have recordings, documents, witnesses." Dante approached Vincent. "You're very careful with your own recordings, but you forgot that other people can record too." Vincent looked around like a cornered animal, realizing his carefully constructed world was crumbling. "Eleanor," he said, turning to his wife with a desperate plea, "you can't believe them. I protected you, I cared for you, I gave you everything a woman could ever want. You turned me into a prisoner in my own life." Eleanor's voice was firm, all her fury channeled into a cold determination. "You stole my years, my dignity, my identity as a woman, and all for money. It was for our future. There was no our. There was only you, your plans, your greed." Eleanor turned to the investigator. "What happens now?" "Now he will answer for the crimes he committed. And you, madam, are free to live the life you choose." As Vincent was led away by the investigators, still protesting his innocence and making empty threats, Eleanor found herself alone with Dante in the office. The silence between them was heavy with everything that had happened, with all the devastating revelations of the past few days. "And now?" she asked. "Now you decide who you want to be," Dante replied. "Without Vincent, without the pressures of your family, without the expectations of others. For the first time in your life, you can choose freely." "And you? Is your revenge complete?" Dante hesitated. "The revenge lost its importance the moment I truly fell in love with you." "How can I know if that's real or if it's still part of your plan?" "You can't know, you'll have to trust." He moved closer to her. "Just as I'll have to trust that you can forgive me for how this all began." Eleanor looked at the man who had awakened her sexuality and then shattered her illusions. There was as much love as there was anger in her heart, as much gratitude as resentment. "I need time," she said, "to find out who I am when no one is controlling me." "How much time?" "I don't know, maybe a lot. Maybe never." Dante nodded, accepting the uncertainty. "I'll be here when you decide, if you decide." When Eleanor walked out of that office, she left behind not only Vincent and the sham that had been her marriage, but also the version of herself that had existed for 29 years. For the first time in her life, she was completely free to choose her own path. And though she knew this freedom would come with challenges she could barely imagine, she also knew she would rather face 1,000 uncertainties than live one, more day in the golden prison that had been her life until then. 6 months later, Eleanor was unrecognizable, not just physically, though she had cut her hair into a modern bob and traded her demure dresses for clothes that highlighted her personality, but mainly in the way she inhabited her own body. There was a confidence in her movements, a light in her eyes that hadn't existed before. She had rented a flat in Chelsea, far from the Hampstead mansion that held so many painful memories. It was a small space, but entirely hers, every piece of furniture chosen by her, every object reflecting her personal tastes, which she was discovering for the first time. She had enrolled in a comparative literature course at UCL, resuming the studies she had abandoned for her marriage, and had started writing a book about her experience. The divorce process had been turbulent, but Vincent's imprisonment for murder and extortion had simplified things legally. The story had leaked to the press. Pharmaceutical heir-kept wife, captive for £1 million inheritance, causing a scandal that shook London high society. Eleanor had faced judgmental stares, malicious whispers, and ostracism from people who had once courted her, but she discovered that freedom was worth any social price. Her parents had reacted as expected. Matilda alternated between crying fits and angry outbursts, lamenting the disgrace her daughter had brought upon the family. Dr. Stanton simply stopped speaking to her, as if Eleanor had died the moment she decided to divorce. The pain of family rejection was real, but it couldn't compare to the joy of finally being able to breathe. Clarissa had tried to reconnect after Vincent's arrest, claiming she had been blackmailed into spying on her, that she had always been concerned for her friend's well-being. But Eleanor had discovered the truth through Dante's investigator. Clarissa had been paid by Vincent since before the wedding to infiltrate Eleanor's life and report any sign of dissatisfaction or rebellion. The betrayal of her childhood friend had hurt more than Vincent's, because it had been wrapped in feigned affection. During these months, Eleanor and Dante had kept in sporadic contact. He had respected her request for time and space, appearing occasionally with practical excuses, divorce papers, legal matters related to Vincent's case, but always maintaining an emotional distance. There was an unresolved tension between them, genuine feelings obscured by the complicated circumstances of how they met. It was on an October afternoon as Eleanor was walking along the Chelsea embankment, absorbed in a manuscript she was editing, that she nearly bumped into a man jogging in the opposite direction. When she looked up to apologize, she found Dante standing before her, breathless from his run, his slightly long hair damp with sweat. "Eleanor." The way he said her name brought back all the sensations she had spent months trying to process. "Dante." She closed the book, suddenly aware of how different she was since they had last seen each other. "Do you always run here?" "No, I live nearby now. I moved to Chelsea a few weeks ago." She raised an eyebrow. "What a coincidence." It wasn't a coincidence. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she didn't remember seeing before. "I wanted to be close, in case you needed anything, or in case you wanted to talk. And why didn't you say you were here?" "Because I promised I'd give you time and space. I thought showing up suddenly would be breaking that promise." They stood there, in the middle of the bustling pavement, surrounded by people jogging, walking, living their normal lives, while between them hung the weight of everything left unsaid. "Would you like to get a coffee?" Eleanor asked impulsively. Dante smiled, and she realized how much she had missed that smile. "I'd love to." They went to a small, cozy cafe on the King's Road, where they found a table in the corner away from prying eyes. Dante ordered a black coffee, Eleanor a cappuccino, and for a few minutes they sat in silence, observing each other. "You're different," he said finally. "Different how?" "More yourself, more present, as if you've finally arrived in your own life." Eleanor smiled. "That's exactly how I feel, like I've woken up after 29 years of sleep." "And how has this awakening been?" "Difficult, frightening, wonderful." She stirred the sugar in her coffee, searching for the right words. "You know that feeling when you take off a piece of clothing that's been too tight for years? The relief is immense, but there's also a new vulnerability in being exposed." "And you like the exposure?" "I do. For the first time in my life, I like who I am when no one is telling me how I should be." Dante leaned forward. "Can I ask you something?" "You can. Have you managed to forgive me? For what I planned to do, for the way we met?" Eleanor had prepared for this question for months, but when it finally came, she realized the answer was more complex than she had imagined. "I've understood something during this time," she said slowly, "that perhaps there is no absolute forgiveness or condemnation. There is what happened, and there is what we choose to do with what happened." "And what have you chosen to do?" "I've chosen to keep the real part, the genuine feelings that grew. Between us, what you taught me about myself, how I felt when I was in your arms." She looked at him directly. "The rest, the plans, the revenge, the initial motives, that belongs to the past. And I've decided I'm not going to live in the past anymore." Dante took her hand across the table. "Eleanor, I need you to know that what I felt for you was real from the first moment. It may have started as revenge, but it turned into love before we even touched." "I know." "How do you know?" "Because I've learned to recognize truth when I see it, and because I've learned to trust my own instincts." She turned her palm up, lacing her fingers with his. "And my instincts tell me that you truly love me." "I do. more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. And I love you too, despite everything and because of everything." They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the simplicity and complexity of that mutual confession. "And now?" Dante asked. "Now we do things differently than we did before. No secrets, no manipulations, no power games." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Now we try to build something, real based on who we really are, not on who we think we should be." "You want to try?" "I do, but this time at my pace, on my terms." Dante smiled. "What are your terms?" "First, total transparency, about everything. About your past, your business, your ex-girlfriends, your fears, your dreams, everything." "Agreed." "Second, independence. I have my own life now, my own projects, my own identity. I won't give that up for any man, not even you." "I wouldn't expect you to. In fact, it's your independence that I'm attracted to." "Third, emotional honesty. If there are problems, fights, disagreements, we talk about them. We don't pretend everything is fine when it's not." "That might be the hardest for me," Dante admitted. "I've always been the type to solve problems on my own." "Then you'll have to learn to share. A real relationship means mutual vulnerability." "And fourth?" "Fourth is that if you ever feel you don't love me anymore, or that you want someone else, you tell me. You don't keep me in a sham like Vincent did." Dante brought her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. "That will never happen, but I promise that if my feelings ever change, you will be the first to know." In that moment, Eleanor felt something definitively click into place. It wasn't the feeling of completeness that romantic films promised. She was already complete on her own. It was the feeling of conscious choice, of building something true with someone who saw her and loved her exactly as she was. In the months that followed, Eleanor and Dante built a relationship unlike anything she had ever known. It wasn't the desperate passion of their first encounters, nor the false harmony of her marriage to Vincent. It was something more, solid and yet more flexible, love based on daily choice, mutual respect, and the certainty that they were both there because they wanted to be. Dante proved to be a surprisingly attentive and respectful partner. He supported her studies, discreetly financed the publication of her book when it was finished, and gradually introduced her to social circles where her intelligence and personality were valued above her beauty or marital status. Eleanor, in turn, helped Dante confront the guilt he carried over Adriana's death and rebuild his ability to trust people. She taught him that strength didn't mean absolute control, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that it was possible to love someone without trying to change them. A year after their reunion on the embankment, they were having dinner at a discreet restaurant in Hampstead when Dante took a small velvet box from his pocket. "Before you panic," he said quickly, "it's not a traditional marriage proposal." Eleanor laughed, touched by his nervousness. "What is it then?" "It's a promise, that I choose you every day, and that I hope you continue to choose me." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring, nothing like the ostentatious stone Vincent had given her. "It doesn't have to be forever. It doesn't have to come with contracts or legal obligations. It can be for as long as it makes sense for both of us." Eleanor took the ring and examined it. It was perfect in its simplicity, just like the relationship they had built. "It's beautiful," she said, "but are you sure this is what you want? A relationship with no guarantees, no eternal promises?" "Eleanor, eternal promises are an illusion. No one can promise they'll feel the same way in 20 years. Dante took her hands. "But I can promise to be honest with you, to fight for what we have when it's worth fighting for, and to release you with love if that's ever what you want." "And if I wear the ring?" "It means you promise the same thing." Eleanor looked at the man sitting across from her, imperfect, complicated, but genuine in a way she hadn't found anywhere else. She thought of the journey she had taken since that desperate night in the greenhouse, when she had confessed to Clarissa that she no longer knew if she wanted to be saved or destroyed. She had discovered a third option, to be reborn. "Yes," she said, holding out her left hand. "I accept your terms." As Dante slipped the ring onto her finger, Eleanor felt she was making the first truly free promise of her life. She wasn't committing out of family pressure, social expectations, or fear of loneliness. She was choosing out of love, love for Dante, but mainly love for herself and the life she had built. 2 weeks later, they held a small commitment ceremony in the same greenhouse where it had all begun. The property in the Cotswolds had been sold after Vincent's arrest, but the new owners allowed them to use the space. Dante had had the old structure restored, and it was now filled with vibrant green flowers, growing freely without excessive pruning. The only guests were the investigator who had helped expose Vincent, the therapist who had supported Eleanor through the divorce, and surprisingly Matilda. Eleanor's mother had shown up unannounced on the morning of the ceremony, carrying a bouquet of white roses. "I came to apologize," she said with tears in her eyes, "for teaching you that being a woman meant being small, for preparing you for a life that wasn't a life. Mother, you are more beautiful now than you have ever been, more alive, and I've realized that maybe that's what a mother should want for her daughter." It was a moment of reconciliation that Eleanor hadn't expected, but which felt like an unexpected blessing. The ceremony was simple. There was no priest, no traditional vows, no promises of submission or obedience. Instead, Eleanor and Dante spoke about the journey they had taken, the love they had chosen to build, and the future they wanted to create together. "I promise to love you as you are, not as I wish you were," said Eleanor. "I promise to support you in all your dreams, even when they don't include me," Dante replied. When they kissed at the end of the ceremony, surrounded by the wild flowers growing freely in the restored greenhouse, Eleanor felt she had finally found her place in the world, not as an obedient daughter, not as a decorative wife, but as a whole woman, capable of loving and being loved, of dreaming and achieving, of making mistakes and starting over. Later, when all the guests had left and she was alone with Dante in the garden, he asked, "Any regrets?" "None," she answered without hesitation. "And you?" "Just one." "What's that?" "That I didn't find you sooner, that you had to suffer so much to get here." Eleanor turned to look at him, this man who had been both her ruin and her salvation. "But if you had found me sooner, I wouldn't be who I am today. Maybe I needed to go through all of that to be ready for what we have now." "Do you believe that?" "I do. I believe that sometimes we have to break completely to be able to rebuild ourselves the right way." Dante pulled her into his arms, and when he kissed her, Eleanor felt the same fire as the first time, but now accompanied by something deeper, the certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning, she woke early and went for a walk alone through the property's gardens. She passed the greenhouse where it had all begun, now transformed into a symbol of rebirth and growth. The flowers growing inside were free to bloom as they wished, without pruning, without limitations, following only their own nature. That was exactly how Eleanor felt, free to grow, to blossom, and to transform without limits imposed by others. She had learned that true love was not a prison, but liberation, that happiness was not conformity, but authenticity, and that sometimes, to find our true life, we must have the courage to destroy the false one we are living. When Dante appeared beside her, his hair still messy from sleep, she smiled and allowed herself to imagine all the dawns to come. She didn't know what the future would bring, what challenges they would face, whether they would stay together forever, or if their journeys would lead them down different paths. But for the first time in her life, uncertainty didn't frighten her, because she had learned that she could trust herself to make the right choices, to recognize true love when she found it, and to be strong enough to live the life she chose. And as the sun rose over the Cotswold Hills, Eleanor Stanton, no longer Marlowe, no longer the perfect daughter or the decorative wife, but simply herself, took a deep breath and prepared for another day of a life that was finally, truly her own.